Sarah walked into the coffee shop wearing her usual jeans and oversized sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The barista smiled warmly as she approached the counter, treating her like any other regular customer who came in for their morning coffee. Nobody in the small coastal town of Millbrook knew that the woman ordering a simple latte held one of the most prestigious positions in the Navy. The morning rush buzzed around her as she waited for her drink. A group of college students discussed their weekend plans at a nearby table, while a businessman typed furiously on his laptop. Sarah blended seamlessly into this ordinary scene, just another face in the crowd. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor asking if she could water their plants while they were away. She quickly replied with a thumbs-up emoji, the same response any helpful neighbor would give. At the grocery store later that morning, Sarah encountered Mrs. Henderson from down the street. The elderly woman had been struggling with her heavy bags, so Sarah naturally stepped in to help. Mrs. Henderson thanked her profusely, mentioning how nice it was to have such considerate young people in the neighborhood. She had no idea that the woman helping her had commanded naval operations across 3 different oceans. The hardware store proved to be another routine stop. Sarah needed supplies to fix a leaky faucet in her kitchen. The store clerk, Mike, had helped her many times before. He joked about how she was becoming quite the handywoman, living alone in that big house. Mike had always wondered what Sarah did for work, but she kept those conversations brief, usually just mentioning that she traveled frequently for business. During lunch at the local diner, Sarah sat at her usual corner booth, reading a mystery novel while enjoying a turkey sandwich. The waitress, Jenny, had served her countless times over the past 2 years. They chatted about the upcoming town festival and whether Sarah would participate in the pie contest again this year. Jenny remembered how Sarah had surprised everyone last year by winning 3rd place with her apple cinnamon pie, despite claiming she rarely baked. The afternoon brought an unexpected encounter at the post office. While waiting in line, Sarah overheard 2 men discussing military news they had seen on television. One mentioned how impressive it was that more women were taking leadership roles in the armed forces, though he doubted they could handle the real pressure of command. His companion agreed, saying that military leadership required a certain toughness that most women simply did not possess. Sarah listened quietly, her expression remaining neutral as she processed their words. The irony was not lost on her, standing there in her casual clothes while these men debated the capabilities she demonstrated daily in her actual career. She chose not to engage, simply collecting her mail and continuing with her day as if the conversation had no personal relevance. Evening found Sarah in her backyard garden, tending to the tomato plants she had started from seeds earlier in the spring. Her neighbor, Robert, called over the fence to compliment her on how well the garden was growing. He mentioned that his wife was impressed by how Sarah managed to keep everything so neat and organized, especially considering how often she was away on business trips. The local book club meeting that night provided Sarah with her weekly dose of intellectual stimulation outside her professional world. The 8 members gathered in Clara's living room to discuss their latest selection, a historical fiction novel about World War II. Sarah offered thoughtful insights about the strategic elements of the story, though she was careful to frame her comments in terms of what she had read rather than what she knew from experience. As the evening wound down, several members lingered to chat about personal matters. Amanda shared news about her son's college acceptance, while David discussed his recent promotion at the insurance company. When asked about her work, Sarah gave her standard response about consulting for various organizations, which required frequent travel but allowed her flexibility to live wherever she chose. Walking home under the streetlights, Sarah reflected on the comfortable anonymity her civilian life provided. In Millbrook, she was simply Sarah Johnson, the friendly woman who lived in the blue house on Maple Street. She was known for her kindness to neighbors, her impressive garden, and her mysterious work that took her away regularly but provided enough income to live comfortably without ostentation. The next morning brought the familiar routine of coffee, errands, and casual interactions with people who saw her as an ordinary member of their community. None of them suspected that their quiet neighbor had spent years navigating complex international waters, making decisions that affected thousands of personnel, and earning the respect of military leaders worldwide. In Millbrook, rank meant nothing, and Sarah treasured this space where she could exist without the weight of command on her shoulders. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while Sarah was reorganizing her home office. The caller ID showed a number she recognized immediately, though she had hoped not to see it during her scheduled leave time. Commander Richard's voice carried the tension that always accompanied urgent situations requiring immediate attention from senior leadership. A developing crisis in the South Pacific demanded her expertise and authority. Sarah listened carefully as Richards briefed her on the situation involving multiple naval vessels and delicate diplomatic considerations with allied nations. The complexity of the operation required someone with her specific experience and security clearance to coordinate the response effectively. Within 3 hours, Sarah had transformed from the casual neighbor watering her garden into a figure of military precision. Her civilian clothes were replaced by a crisp naval uniform bearing the 4 stars that commanded respect from personnel across all branches of service. The metamorphosis was remarkable, as if she had shed one identity to reveal another entirely different person underneath. The drive to the regional airport felt surreal after weeks of grocery shopping and book club discussions. Sarah's mind shifted gears from domestic concerns to strategic considerations involving international waters and military protocol. Her phone buzzed continuously with updates from various departments, each requiring her input on matters of national security importance. During the flight to the operational headquarters, Sarah reviewed classified documents that outlined the scope of the crisis. The situation involved not just American interests but required coordination with naval forces from 3 allied nations. Her reputation for diplomatic effectiveness in complex military scenarios had made her the obvious choice to lead this particular operation. The briefing room at headquarters buzzed with activity as officers from various departments prepared comprehensive reports for her arrival. Maps covered every available wall space, showing vessel positions, territorial boundaries, and potential conflict zones. The assembled personnel represented years of military experience, yet they all waited for her assessment before proceeding with any major decisions. Sarah's first official meeting involved video conferences with naval commanders stationed thousands of miles away. Her questions were direct and focused, cutting through unnecessary details to identify the core issues requiring immediate resolution. The other officers quickly recognized her command style, which balanced decisive action with careful consideration of all available options. The complexity of the operation became clearer as intelligence reports revealed the involvement of foreign military vessels in disputed waters. Sarah's role required not just military strategy but also diplomatic finesse to avoid escalating tensions unnecessarily. Her years of experience in similar situations proved invaluable as she developed a multi-phase response plan. Communication with Washington required Sarah to brief senior Pentagon officials on her recommended course of action. The video conference room fell silent as she outlined her strategy, explaining how each phase would address different aspects of the crisis while maintaining options for peaceful resolution. Her confidence and expertise were evident in every response to their challenging questions. Meanwhile, back in Millbrook, Sarah's neighbors noticed her sudden absence. Mrs. Henderson mentioned to Robert that Sarah's newspapers were piling up, and her usually well-maintained garden showed signs of neglect. They assumed she had been called away on another business trip, unaware that their quiet neighbor was coordinating a major naval operation. The local coffee shop felt different without Sarah's regular morning presence. Jenny at the diner asked other customers if they had seen her lately, expressing mild concern about her unexpected disappearance. Mike at the hardware store held onto a special order she had placed, expecting her to return within a few days as she usually did. Sarah's absence from the book club meeting prompted speculation among the members. Clara suggested that Sarah's mysterious work must be more demanding than she let on, given how abruptly she sometimes disappeared. The group decided to postpone discussing the next book selection until she returned, as her insights always enriched their conversations significantly. At headquarters, Sarah's days stretched long into the nights as she monitored developments across multiple time zones. Her temporary quarters were spartanly furnished, a stark contrast to her comfortable home in Millbrook with its garden views and cozy reading nook. The weight of command settled familiar on her shoulders, though she missed the simple pleasures of her civilian routine. The operation's first phase commenced under Sarah's direct oversight, involving careful positioning of naval assets to establish a strong but non-threatening presence in the disputed region. Her orders were transmitted across thousands of miles of ocean, reaching vessels whose crews had no idea that their mission commander was a woman who spent her free time winning pie contests in small-town America. Progress reports arrived throughout the night as Sarah maintained constant communication with field commanders. The precision of the operation reflected her meticulous planning and the trust her subordinates placed in her judgment. Each successful milestone brought the crisis closer to resolution while maintaining the delicate balance required for diplomatic success. As the week progressed, Sarah's dual existence became increasingly apparent to her. In the military environment, she was Admiral Johnson, a respected leader whose decisions affected international relations and military strategy. Her authority was unquestioned, her expertise valued by colleagues and superiors alike who had witnessed her capabilities in previous challenging situations. The contrast with her Millbrook identity could not have been more pronounced, yet both versions of herself felt equally authentic to Sarah's sense of personal identity. The crisis reached its critical phase during Sarah's second week away from Millbrook. Intelligence reports indicated that foreign naval vessels had begun moving toward the disputed waters, creating a potential flashpoint that could escalate beyond diplomatic resolution. Sarah's experience in managing such delicate situations became crucial as she coordinated responses across multiple naval commands while maintaining communication channels with allied forces. Her strategic decisions during this period demonstrated the leadership qualities that had earned her promotion to admiral rank years earlier. The complex choreography of naval movements required precise timing and clear communication to prevent misunderstandings that could trigger larger conflicts. Sarah's calm demeanor under pressure reassured subordinates while her decisive actions gained respect from international counterparts involved in the operation. The successful resolution of the crisis came through a combination of military positioning and diplomatic negotiation that Sarah orchestrated over several intense days. Foreign vessels withdrew from disputed areas after face-saving agreements were reached through channels that Sarah had helped establish. Her role in preventing potential armed conflict earned commendations from multiple government agencies, though such recognition would remain classified from public knowledge. Returning to Millbrook after 3 weeks felt like stepping between two completely different worlds. Sarah's neighbors welcomed her back with casual waves and friendly inquiries about her business trip. Mrs. Henderson expressed relief that Sarah was home safely, mentioning how she had worried when the newspapers kept piling up despite Robert's efforts to collect them daily. The transition back to civilian routine proved more challenging than usual after the intensity of recent military operations. Sarah found herself unconsciously maintaining the heightened awareness and quick decision-making patterns that had been essential during the crisis. Simple tasks like grocery shopping required conscious effort to slow down and engage with her peaceful surroundings appropriately. Jenny at the diner noticed that Sarah seemed different somehow, more alert and focused than before her latest trip. When asked about her travels, Sarah provided her usual vague responses about consulting work, though Jenny sensed there was more to the story than her regular customer was willing to share. The conversation moved on to lighter topics as Sarah deliberately steered away from any discussion that might reveal details about her actual profession. The book club reunion provided Sarah with much-needed intellectual stimulation in a relaxed environment. Clara had selected a political thriller for the group's consideration, and the discussion naturally turned to questions about military accuracy in the plot. Sarah found herself carefully moderating her responses, sharing insights that seemed credible without revealing the depth of her actual knowledge about naval operations and international security matters. Mike at the hardware store mentioned that he had been holding Sarah's special order for nearly a month, joking that her work trips seemed to be getting longer and more frequent. Sarah thanked him for his patience while internally reflecting on how her military responsibilities were increasingly interfering with her ability to maintain consistent civilian relationships and commitments. The garden required extensive attention after weeks of neglect, and Sarah threw herself into the physical work with enthusiasm that surprised her neighbors. Robert commented over the fence about how energetically she was tackling the weeding, not knowing that physical activity helped her decompress from the mental intensity of command responsibilities. The simple act of nurturing plants provided a therapeutic contrast to making decisions that affected international stability. Amanda from the book club stopped by one afternoon to check on Sarah and mentioned how much the group had missed her contributions to their discussions. During their conversation, Amanda casually asked whether Sarah's work ever involved anything dangerous, noting that she sometimes seemed to carry herself with an alertness that suggested familiarity with serious situations. Sarah deflected the question with humor, suggesting that business consulting could certainly be hazardous to one's sanity if not one's physical safety. Amanda laughed and accepted the explanation, though she filed away her observation about Sarah's occasionally military-like bearing and situational awareness that seemed inconsistent with typical business experience. The local news that evening featured a brief report about successful diplomatic negotiations that had resolved tensions in the South Pacific region. Sarah watched with interest as reporters discussed the situation she had actually helped manage, though her role remained completely unknown to the journalists covering the story. The irony of watching news about events she had directly influenced while sitting in her Millbrook living room was not lost on her. Phone calls from former military colleagues became more frequent as Sarah's reputation for crisis management continued growing within defense circles. She found herself declining invitations to speak at military academies and strategy conferences, preferring to maintain her low profile rather than seek recognition for her achievements. The calls usually came during her garden time, creating jarring transitions between professional consultations and domestic tranquility. Mrs. Henderson's grandson visited during the weekend, and the young man's enthusiasm for military history led to an extended conversation with Sarah about naval strategy during World War II. She found herself sharing detailed knowledge about historical operations while carefully avoiding any mention of her own service experience. The young man was impressed by her expertise, assuming she was simply a very dedicated amateur historian. The contrast between her public invisibility and professional significance became increasingly apparent to Sarah during quiet moments of reflection. In Millbrook, she was valued for her kindness, her gardening skills, and her contributions to community activities. In the military world, she was respected for strategic thinking, leadership capabilities, and the ability to navigate complex international situations with diplomatic skill. Her dual existence required constant vigilance to maintain appropriate boundaries between her civilian and military identities. Simple conversations could become complicated when neighbors asked innocent questions that touched on areas of her expertise. Sarah had developed sophisticated deflection techniques over the years, but the mental energy required to maintain her cover story was becoming more noticeable as her military responsibilities intensified. The revelation came on an ordinary Thursday morning when Sarah was least prepared for her two worlds to collide. She had been enjoying coffee at her usual spot in the local diner when breaking news interrupted the peaceful atmosphere of breakfast conversations and morning routines. The television above the counter showed aerial footage of naval vessels in formation, and the reporter's voice carried the gravity of international significance. Jenny turned up the volume as customers throughout the diner focused their attention on the developing story. The news report detailed a major military operation that had successfully prevented an international crisis through coordinated naval deployment and diplomatic negotiation. Sarah watched with growing unease as the reporter announced that Admiral Sarah Johnson would be receiving the Navy Cross for her exceptional leadership during the operation. The silence in the diner became deafening as Sarah's photograph appeared on the screen, showing her in full naval uniform with 4 stars clearly visible on her shoulders. Jenny's coffee pot trembled in her hands as she stared between the television and the woman she had been serving casual breakfasts for over 2 years. The other customers followed Jenny's gaze, their expressions showing confusion and disbelief. Mrs. Henderson, who had been sitting 2 booths away, gasped audibly as recognition dawned. The helpful neighbor who had carried her groceries and won 3rd place in the pie contest was apparently one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy. Robert appeared in the diner doorway, having rushed over after seeing the news broadcast at home, his mouth hanging open as he processed this impossible information. Sarah sat frozen as her carefully constructed civilian identity crumbled around her. The reporter continued describing the classified operation, mentioning how Admiral Johnson's strategic brilliance had prevented potential armed conflict between multiple nations. Mike from the hardware store entered the diner just as the broadcast switched to file footage of Sarah addressing a military conference, her authoritative bearing completely unlike the friendly woman who bought garden supplies every weekend. The questions began hesitantly at first, with Jenny asking whether there had been some mistake in the news report. Sarah's confirmation that the woman on television was indeed her sent ripples of shock throughout the small crowd that had gathered. Mrs. Henderson struggled to reconcile the image of her gentle neighbor with the decorated military commander being praised for preventing international warfare. Amanda arrived after receiving frantic phone calls from other book club members who had seen the broadcast. She stared at Sarah with new understanding, finally, comprehending the source of the military bearing and strategic insights that had always seemed slightly out of place during their literary discussions. The woman who had offered thoughtful analysis of historical fiction had actually lived through scenarios that most people only read about. David from the book club approached their table, his insurance salesman's perspective completely inadequate for processing this revelation. He asked Sarah directly how long she had been serving in the Navy, and her response that she had been an officer for over 20 years created another wave of stunned silence. The timeline meant that her entire residence in Millbrook had been a carefully maintained cover for her actual career. Clara pushed through the growing crowd, her usual composure shattered by the impossibility of reconciling her quiet book club member with the military leader being honored on national television. She demanded to know whether Sarah had been lying to them about everything, her voice carrying hurt and confusion rather than anger. The accusation hung in the air as Sarah struggled to find words that could bridge the gap between her two identities. Sarah's explanation came slowly and carefully, emphasizing that her civilian persona had never been false, merely incomplete. She described how her military service required security clearances that prevented casual discussion of her professional activities. Her love for the community, her genuine friendships, and her appreciation for the peaceful life Millbrook provided had all been completely authentic, even while her career remained hidden. The crowd listened as Sarah revealed details about the balance she had tried to maintain between serving her country and finding personal peace in a place where rank and responsibility could not follow her. She explained how the anonymity of small-town life had provided essential psychological relief from the constant pressure of making decisions that affected national security and international relations. Mrs. Henderson was the first to speak after Sarah's explanation, mentioning how the kindness and helpfulness Sarah had always shown made perfect sense in light of her military service. The values that made her an excellent neighbor were apparently the same qualities that had made her an exceptional naval officer. Robert nodded in agreement, noting that Sarah's organizational skills and calm demeanor had always suggested leadership experience. Jenny found her voice to ask whether Sarah would be leaving Millbrook now that her secret was revealed. The relief in her expression when Sarah confirmed that she intended to remain in the community was shared by others who had grown genuinely fond of their mysterious neighbor. The diner gradually returned to normal conversation levels as people processed this extraordinary revelation. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors to Sarah's house as word spread throughout Millbrook about their celebrity resident. Some came out of curiosity, others to express pride in having an admiral living in their community. Sarah patiently answered questions while privately mourning the loss of her anonymity and the simple pleasures of being just another face in the crowd. Mike arrived with Sarah's special order from the hardware store, joking that he would definitely remember to address her as Admiral from now on. His good-natured humor helped ease the tension that Sarah felt about how dramatically her relationships with neighbors might change now that her military career was public knowledge. The book club held an emergency meeting that evening to discuss how this revelation would affect their group dynamics. Clara worried that Sarah might feel obligated to leave, while Amanda expressed excitement about the unique perspectives their military member could bring to future discussions. The consensus emerged that Sarah would remain welcome exactly as she always had been, with the understanding that some topics might require discretion. As the day ended, Sarah reflected on the strange relief that accompanied the end of her double life. The burden of constantly maintaining separate identities had been lifted, replaced by the challenge of integrating her military and civilian selves into a single, authentic existence. Millbrook would never be the same sanctuary it had been, but perhaps it could become something even more meaningful as a place where all aspects of her life could coexist openly.